these people is here. Denny, because she is probably one of the smartest people that I know, but also she's extremely passionate about students and understanding sexuality and being able to have those real conversations and have a biblical understanding about it. She sees what goes on in the youth group, and so she is kind of an extension of being able to see that, as well as her parents did a really great job. And so she has a good foundation to speak to some of this. Nadine, we said this on Sunday a little bit, but one of the biggest gauges for me is, do your kids still want to talk to you after they leave the house? That's really huge. And so regardless of if we feel like we did it right, we did it wrong, whatever, and Nadine can talk about that if she wants to, but her kids still talk to her, and she can still, you even texted them and was like, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you have anything you want me to share? And that's really cool, and hopefully all of us who are parents get to experience that level of relationship someday. And Joe, just because he makes me look good, no, I'm just kidding, because he is one of...
We'll be playing Who Wore It Better, so if you could write down your votes.
Yes. He is one of the most intentional leaders that I've been around, and so even when it comes to sexuality and understanding that. If I remember correctly from your story, I'll let you speak to it when we get to it. You had a lot of students, or maybe not a lot, but a good handful of students in the youth group you led in Baker, Montana, that had questions and were working through LGBTQ identities and things like that. And then he wrote his master's thesis on ministry in LGBTQ. Is that right? Cool. And we like to lean into people who are intelligent and care. Can't have just one or the other. We love it when it's both. So, we're gonna start out easy and just like ease ourselves into this. First question, at what point should you start talking to your children about sexuality? At what point do you start doing that? And it's kind of like whoever wants to answer will just kind of bounce back and forth. Sure?
Sure, I'll start. Obviously, each child is unique, so it's important to keep that in mind as we talk about all of these subjects tonight, that there isn't necessarily one right answer for every child. So, and then there's age-appropriate, obviously, conversations to be had. One of the things that I would note is that when your children start to become aware of their body, right? So it's usually between the ages of 3 and 6 that they start to become aware of their body. Boys tend to become aware of things a little earlier than girls for obvious reasons, right? They're more visible.
I'm not sure I understand that truthfully.
Could you just elaborate for a second?
So there's going to come a point where that needs to be explained to them in an age-appropriate way. So if nothing else beyond the physical, that's going to start pretty young. I would say by age 6 at probably the latest, they're going to have questions, or they're going to explore, or they're going to be aware. And so I would say that's a perfect time to start the conversation with them about at least their bodies, and we could go into all of the warnings. I mean, right, there's a lot that needs to be said to children at a young age now, unfortunately. I don't know how much you want me to go on with that subject, but
that's good. You have something?
Yeah, I think so. We have obviously this dual topic right now of like sex and sexuality, and like I would say, like especially at a young age, I mean, we recognize like my wife and I have my daughter's 7 and 4 are my daughter's ages currently, and my wife and I love to go to the public library in Billings and pick out books and get a bunch of books, and there have been multiple occasions where like halfway through a kid's books, it turns out they're both princesses, even though one is named Tommy. And so like it's sneaky sometimes and it's surprising. But what my wife and I have tried to focus on right now, especially when it comes to sexuality, is just, I think that sometimes we rush to address specifics, and sometimes that comes up naturally. You just have to kind of point something out or whatever. But and again, whether the fruit shows later, obviously I'm early on this journey, but I'm trying to say, like, what are the guiding statements that are going to help my kids address this later as the situations come up? So, like, the value of God's word, highlighting how God's normal structure and design works in life and sexuality. And, like, just by building a wide platform, then as situations come up, I feel like hopefully we'll have a better shot of addressing things like that when they when they do come home and say, hey, why did that show have, like, which obviously we try and manage that, but like, sometimes it happens where it's like, hey, why did that show have that couple that had, that there was two moms instead of the mom and dad? And it's like, well, when those arise, hopefully we'll have built some of that foundation.
And kind of a question off of that, like, how do we define terms during the different stages? Like, should you be clinical as early as possible, or should you try to like ease them into it so it's not as uncomfortable?
So one of the things I would say is, what are you comfortable with your children saying out loud in public? Because whatever you teach them most likely will get said out loud in public at some point. That's just how kids are, right? If you teach them the word penis, they're gonna say it. And so if you're not comfortable with, right? so, and that's fine as long as your comfort level is okay with that. I mean, I think biology is a good place to start. If you're not, one of the things that I wrote down is talking to young children about the bathing suit parts of our body is one of a great way to help a small child understand. If it's covered by a bathing suit, right, that's kind of what we consider private and special. It's not secret, it's not bad, it's just only for you, right? And so you can use the biological terms, which is fine, or you can use something more generic when they're younger, like privates or bathing suits. But I do think that whatever you do, you're gonna wanna make sure like they're gonna say it out loud, so.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would also just say, like, I feel like my wife has done a really good job, because obviously, from the male perspective, obviously I lean on my wife to like talk, like inform me about like raising daughters and like all the risks that just come from being a woman. I don't need to preach to the room because you guys get it way more than I would, you know what I'm saying? But like the idea that like women get sexually assaulted more often, and like there's this whole thing, and I recognize that's a real narrative. Like I said, I'm struggling up here because I'm not the poster child to talk about this, but I lean on my wife because my wife talks to me a lot about like the importance of like the appropriate terminology could not just be a good call, it could be like a life-saving call, because there's no confusion over what's, if something were to happen, if something's touched inappropriately or something bad happens in a child's life, like appropriate terminology can help figure it out faster. And obviously, again, I'm not going to speak on it more than that, but I just think I want to just second that a lot,
My childhood friend was taught to call his parts Mr. and Mrs. Bubbles, and he said it in a public at the county fair with like a bunch of people around him, and it was horrific for me as a 6-year-old because I was like, I want to die. Actually, don't say that. For anybody in the room that this maybe is a conversation that they haven't gotten to yet, or maybe this is something that is a struggle point for them. What should we do if we feel like we've waited too long? Like this to start having this conversation. Our kids are older now, and you kind of feel like you waited too long.
Okay, start. Just start. I'm sure you've all heard the Japanese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, and the second best time is today. So if you feel like you've missed the boat, start now. Even if your children are grown, it might still be a conversation to be had. And it can start with an apology if that's what you feel like you need to say. Like, hey, I realize I didn't do this with you, and I'm sorry for that. And I feel like maybe I didn't equip you like I should have. Can we talk about this? Can we have a conversation? Where are you at? What do you have questions about? Especially if they're older and they've probably got questions, and they're gonna freak out the first time you do this, right? They're gonna be like, ugh, I don't want to talk about that with you, right? Like, it's going to be awkward, but it's not too late to start. And so that would be the first thing that I would say is just go ahead and start now. And then if they are really uncomfortable having it with you at this point in their life, then encourage them to have it with someone else. That's also an option, right? So if you're like, wow, I waited too long, and now like they're looking at me like, I don't want to talk to you about it. Great. Who would you like to talk to? Who would you be comfortable with? Would you be comfortable with a youth pastor? Would you be comfortable with a counselor? It doesn't really matter. Like, who would you be comfortable having that conversation with? But I would encourage you to just go ahead and start, even if you feel like you've missed it.
Anything else? Cool. That one actually is pretty simple. Like, Start now. Maybe it's not come home from this event and wake them up and be like, guess what, guys? This is what we're talking about. But you and
or
your...
do and tell us how it goes, please.
Yeah, honestly,
just like, please.
that'd be pretty cool. But make a plan, like whatever that looks like between you and your spouse, to be able to say, like, this is the direction that we're going. A lot of the times, to be frank, by the time Denny and I see those students in youth group, we can tell the ones whose parents have started that conversation and those who still haven't. And it's not about, did you start too late? It's the ones that we can tell their parents are trying to have that conversation even then. Speaking of parents specifically, a lot of parents carry their own baggage when it comes to sexuality, whether it could be purity culture, whether it could be abuse in their own life, or just to be frank, I'm going to put everybody on the spot. How many of you guys feel like your parents did a great job talking to you about sexuality? We got one, everybody. Huge. Two, that tends to be the case. There was a specific reason we did spaghetti tonight. One of my favorite icebreaker questions is, what does spaghetti look like at your house? And you will get answers ranging from, oh yeah, my mom would home make it. It's this old family recipe, and we'd make our own meatballs. And then you'll get, especially students, that'll be like, I make it myself out of a can. And it'll tell you a lot about the student. And I think all of us in the room have a different history when it comes to sexuality and how it was explained to us in our own experiences. And so what do we do as parents if we are all carrying our own baggage? How can we be healthy so that we don't pass that kind of baggage on to our children?
I haven't heard from Denny yet. Denny, you want to take it home? No, well, I mean, I'll jump in. I just,
Do you want to first? Well, for those of you who don't know me very well, maybe I should provide just a tiny bit of context. So I have 3 grown children. I've been married to Chad for 33 years. My previous life, as I call it, before I moved here, I actually have a master's degree in counseling, and I worked with children and adolescents. And so...
This is why we let you go first.
But so that was like my former life before we moved to Montana. And so it's come in handy a lot over the years in terms of just helping people process maybe. So the first thing I want to say is, in a room with more than 2 people in it, it's most likely that there's somebody in the room who's experienced a trauma sexually. And so the first thing I would say to you is, if that is the case and you have not sought counseling or help in that situation, I would strongly encourage you to do so, because these conversations and having a healthy view of sexuality with your child is worth it. Like, you want to be able to help your child have a healthy sexual ethic, like we talked about, a biblical sexual ethic that we've been discussing. And if you absolutely cannot have that conversation, then I want to encourage you to please talk to somebody about that. So the second is, maybe there's not even a trauma, but sex is just really uncomfortable for you. Like, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it's important. And be on the same page with your spouse, right? If you and your spouse, so one of the things you'll probably hear me say multiple times tonight is, it's a tension to be managed, not a problem to be solved. I didn't write that. I think Andy Stanley did, but there's a tension to be managed in all of this, right? And so my husband grew up in a very different life than I did. I grew up in a church very much like this one. Nobody talked about sex, right? Nobody did. My husband grew up in a non-Christian family, had lots of other things that went on in his life when we finally met and he came to know Christ. So there was a tension there between how we each felt comfortable and what we wanted to address. And so in my culture, my purity culture history, right, it was we just don't talk about it. And so I had to get comfortable with that conversation pretty quick. Educate yourself. That's what I would say. If you've come through a situation where, man, my parents never talked to me about this, or the purity culture just made me feel like I was a bad person if I even thought about sex, right? Educate yourself. I think Malachi will probably have some resources that he can refer you to. But the more that you educate yourself, the easier it's going to be to have those conversations. And then obviously we want to ask God, right, for our wisdom. Like, God, what is the right conversation? How do I work through my own history? How can I do this better? And that's one of the things that I'm here to say is, calendar. I texted all of my children and asked them, what did we do that you remember? What did we do well? What do you wish we had done? What could we have done differently? And I got really great feedback from my children about that. And so nobody is perfect at this. So that would be my first thing is to get comfortable with your own sexuality and your own experiences before moving forward. My goal was to help my children not be as caught off guard as I was, if I can say that. And instead of focusing on the fear, right? What if I mess up? What if I mess up? What if I mess up? I wanted to focus on the rewards, right? So like, what are the rewards in my life if I choose differently? So that was one of the things that I would say. So.
I would say also like I call it like the airplane principle, like please adjust your own oxygen mask before helping somebody else. Because truthfully, like when we are so bent out of shape by life, like it is tough. It's just so hard when you are drowning to stop someone else from drowning. And I also want to add to that, because again, some of us might sit here and go, well, that's a very overwhelming task. But I heard a statement that still guides me in ministry. It's not like revolutionary, but there was a person who said, do for the one what you wish you could do for the many. And I would argue that with your own trauma or the own like misunderstandings you may have, just do one thing better. You don't have to solve everything right away, but if you can pass on even a little less brokenness to your children or the next generation, like what a win. Like there's no reason not to start on the one thing for fear that you can't tackle the whole thing, you know? So read one book, correct one misunderstanding, have one conversation about something uncomfortable that you're trying to work through. My dad looked at me one day when I was 13 and said, don't get a girl pregnant. And I said, cool. Anything else? And he's like, no, that about sums it up. I was like, who hurt you? You know what I'm saying? And like my dad grew up without a dad. I mean, his dad walked out on him. He's passing on a little less brokenness, you know? And for me, you know, I've read a lot of books, and I think we get embarrassed about feeling like a novice in something. And it's so silly. We don't hold children to that standard. A child doesn't pick up a violin and we just go like, that sounds like a dying cat, quit it. I mean, you might, because it does. But usually we say, hey, child, it's totally okay that you don't know things. And I don't know why we stopped doing that. It's so mean to us to be like, you don't know things, that's it. You passed the age 18, you're supposed to know the things. And I'm like, have you met 18-year-olds? They don't know anything. I don't know anything. Like, I'm a child, okay? Like, I'm 33, and I'm like, what is life? You know, I just don't know. So, like, let's give ourselves permission to not know things so that we're not embarrassed to start, you know, bite-sizing the elephant, if you will, you know, trying to just knock it out a little bit at a time.
I would say that just because so many of the students that we have, their parents don't feel like they can't have the conversation because they don't feel like they did it well themselves. And I hate that standard that they hold themselves to of like, well, I didn't do it well, so I can't be a hypocrite here. But I think the honesty and the transparency of like, maybe your sibling wasn't born when I was married, and that's hard. And these were the consequences of that. And being honest about the things that we didn't do quite right and the growth that came from that, and just the transparency can go a long way. The students that do have parents that talk them through in that way of humility and just like restoring, like a sexual view of like restoration. That's way more beautiful than just like being perfect. Restoration is way more beautiful.
That's really good. I kind of want to camp on purity culture just for a second, because I know that based on the demographic of the room, to some degree, if you've been in the church for the last, we'll call it 30 years, you may have experienced purity culture. And maybe if you're new to church, purity culture was this idea almost, speaking in generalities, where a Christian sexual ethic was almost idolized as a way of life instead of prioritizing following Christ. And we do believe it is important, but the priorities got a little mixed up. as far as what would be considered or important or not. What are some ways, if we are a parent that has really specifically struggled with responding to purity culture one way or the other, tends to be either people feel like they are lower than dirt because of the things that they've done, or they've taken up that standard and feel like they have to hold it even higher. How should parents respond specifically to purity culture so that it's healthy for their kids?
Like I said, restoration is more beautiful than perfection, in my opinion. Um, the other thing is if you take something that hurt you and just stay bitter at it, you're gonna lose the good. Because the hope that was purity culture was that kids would be able to stand up against the sexual revolution. So in the 70s, that's where it came from. And having compassion towards the people that told us lies of what our value was, and coming from a place of compassion of like, these parents were scared. And that's how this misinformation got presented to us. And then take a step back, and sometimes you do have to disentangle or deconstruct some ideas. And that's okay. And that is a painful process. And I think as women, we probably got a more painful part of that because it attacked our identity in Christ. Of if you weren't a virgin or you weren't pure for your husband, he was going to leave you and you weren't worth anything. That was the crux of what I heard, at least. And that's not true. And calling like lies is important, but also not staying so bitter and swinging the pendulum of, no, I'm a woman, I deserve to be this great sex icon. Because I've seen that happen too, coming out of purity culture. Like, don't swing the pendulum. Don't do that. Like, take the good for what it was, of there's so much goodness and beauty in following God and pursuing holiness, but not taking that and making that your whole identity.
So one of the things that I did receive feedback from my children is that I probably could have done a better job at that. I think I did better, like Joe was saying, I did better than it was done for me, but there was definitely a sense of fear probably along with sex, because, we were youth pastors during a lot of this purity culture. We had purity retreats here at this church, and I'm not saying that those were bad. I think there was a lot of good that came out of them, because at least we were trying to have the conversations instead of silence. But to say again, if I could do it over again, one of the things that I would focus on is the good of sex, like what it really is designed for and the benefits of it and how important it's going to be in your marriage, and talking about it in a way that isn't just like, don't get the girl pregnant, right? That's, and sharing the positives of it instead of just a why we shouldn't. And I think one of the things that, I'm not really sure where this fits in the conversation, but one of the things I really wanted to communicate was, we talked about it in the sermons recently, that sex is part of intimacy. And so a lot of people search for intimacy through sex. And so talking to your children about what healthy intimacy looks like, right? And that in the context of marriage, that's a part of it. And so being able to talk about healthy intimacy and create that for them is important.
Out of that, I really like one of the questions that was sent in that is similar to the one that I had, but I think they worded it way better, is how do you talk to kids, students about pornography? What is the healthy balance between preparing them and educating them, but not stirring up curiosity and driving them to seek what you're trying to avoid? How do you handle that?
I think that in some senses, due to this kind of fear of curiosity and stirring it up, I would say this is one area, and I use this term very carefully, where it still like feels okay to be a little reactionary. Like it's not like it is, your proactive part of the conversation is not like, let me tell you what pornography is and why you should avoid. Like that's not how you be proactive in this moment. So it's okay in some ways to like, I think a lot of, sorry, it's a bit of a scrambled thought, but like, hold that one up there, just it exists. I think there are moments that kids remember where they might have gotten to a place online where pornography, happens. Or I actually tuned into John Michael's sermon last week, and I remember as a kid seeing like a magazine that had women who were in their underwear in the clothing section of something. You know what I'm saying? And like, and I feel like where we drop the ball is that like sometimes a kid will access whatever version of that material that is, whether it's online or some other form of media. And it is so tempting because we know about the dangers of pornography to kind of like kill a mosquito with a bazooka in that moment. And like, and it's true that like you can't just walk up and be like, oh yeah, porn, that's cool. Like you're not gonna do that. But also sometimes we're like, why are you looking at pornography? You gotta stop right now. It's dirty, it's bad. And it's like, whoa, this kid doesn't understand like what's wrong. And like, so instead, like obviously you don't like stop and stare at the screen together and be like, let me talk to you about what's going on. Like you don't do that, but you can say, hey, let's shut this down or let's get rid of this. But can I just ask you, like, I don't know, how'd you end up here? Why'd you have the magazine in your hands? You know what I'm saying? Or like, what, like you're just trying to learn about their experience. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes it is just that like, well, I thought, like again, let's take this example that I seem to remember from John Michael's sermon, but I remember as a kid, like for whatever reason, I don't know, 10-year-old Joe was like, I don't know, the gal who's wearing less clothes is pretty. Like, I don't know, it wasn't a complex thought. It was just a thought. And so like, if I bring that up, I'm not like steeped in sin. I'm just having an observation about what I'm seeing. So like, deal with it at that level. Say, oh man, hey, I understand that God made people and obviously God made us to be attracted to people in that way. And so, you have that theological conversation and then you put it in context and you say, hey, I know that you were exposed to this, but let me give you context for what you saw. Let me tell you the why and why it's important that we take an alternative view, right? That we look a different direction, that we be careful with our eyes and our vision and like those kind of things. So all that to say, I just think I have a deep heart for people who like stumble onto something and then repeat a cycle of shame because they're like, I'm already considered dirty because I looked. And it's like, no, you're just a person who stumbled on something, who is, I don't know, exploring a really complex thing. And it's like, so let's ask questions. Let's, again, replace the negative and the fear with the positive. It's not just, don't look at that. It's like, hey, I understand why you were drawn to that. Or can I ask you why? But let's look over here to this context. Let's talk about the Bible and the image of God and marriage and intimacy and have an age-appropriate conversation that steers them into a new direction. Because truthfully, if our first reaction to the uncovering of pornography is anger, whether we want to or not, in a lot of ways, we send a message of this is something to be hidden and something that will provoke further secrecy and shame. And so that's one, I don't think that's the full picture, to be very clear. There's a lot of other things that have to be in this conversation, but I think that's where my heart is drawn to with students, where I'm like, man, and it's pervasive. Like, we're gonna see it all over the place. It's like, there's no, to stumble upon it is not like, man, I sought it out, or I'm trying to dive down this rabbit hole. It's like, it just happens sometimes. Like, okay, well then let's talk about that,
I think this applies to a lot of situations because I've written what exactly we said, that it's important that we don't react, that we respond. There's a big difference.
See, that's so
between
much
those.
better than when, like, I said that in 4 minutes and it took her 2 seconds.
No, but my point being, it's not, yes, in the context of the pornography, but this is in context of all of this. So one of the things that I think is really important, whether your child comes home and says, Mom, what is fill in the blank, because they heard this word, or kids were laughing about this, or what is that? If our first reaction is, where did you hear that? Like, well, you can't say that, right? Is that shock and awe? Then they start to feel like they did something wrong, right? And that's not the message we want to communicate. It's like, oh, that's an interesting term. You heard that at school? Okay, let's talk about that. Or, oh yeah, you came across that? Oh, okay, let's talk about that. And one of the things that we said to our children was it's okay to be curious, but there are safe boundaries to be curious within. And I would say as your children are older, having a more specific conversation about pornography. And one of the analogies that I always used to use with the students was, if you take a goldfish out of the bowl of water and you throw it on the floor because it wants freedom, it's going to die. Right? The water is not a restriction on that goldfish's life. And sometimes we paint God out as like, oh, he's put up all of these things that we're not allowed to do, right? I'm not allowed to have sex, and I'm not allowed to look at porn. I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to do that, right? And so talking about, no, these are things that God has designed. And pornography is specifically, as we all know, like the strongest sexual organ we have is our mind. It's not actually part of our body. Like, it's not just our physical body, it's our mind. Our mind is going to go there before anything else. And so when we are having those conversations, more specifically as they're older, talking probably about porn specifically, if that is what needs to happen, is to talk about how it shapes our mind and what it can lead to, and the constant dissatisfaction that can come. There's lots of research about why porn is bad. So we're not going to get into all of that right now because it's just too much. But being able to have some of those resources and being able to talk about that with your student is important, right? Like God creates these boundaries to keep us safe. I'm just checking to see if I had any other thoughts.
This is why we let Nadine talk first. I'm just telling you, smart stuff.
Actually, this is something that Denny said in our conversation. I don't know if she even remembers that she said that one of the things pornography does is it robs us of the opportunity to discover what God meant for us to discover in marriage. And I loved that idea, right? Like being exposed to those things robs us of the joy of discovery. Do you remember saying that?
Say it again for the people in the back. It's fine.
Say it twice, Denny.
That was something that my mom didn't talk to me very frequently or very specifically about sex that often. It normally came from my dad that I heard things, which is funny. But one thing that my mom said that stuck with me, because I was a teenager and I was like, Mom, I feel like I don't know enough. Like all these people are saying things that I don't understand. And she was like, Denny, there's a beauty of innocence and of discovery. And that's where the closest, most intimate connection comes from, is from learning each other. And if you do all this research, you're going to steal that joy and that beautiful, intimate connection that bonds you together. And so for me, that took a lot of fear and a lot of that curiosity. And I was like, I'm going to save that for later. And it really did actually help me, when curiosity did come as a kid, I was able to remember, I'm saving that for later. And it helped me channel for something better. And I think anytime that you can tell your child to think ahead, you ought to. Because yes, kids they don't have the prefrontal cortex. Mine just came in the mail actually last year.
I'm still waiting. That's why I borrow hers all the time.
Seriously.
But that's your job as a parent, is to be their prefrontal cortex, is to be like, oh, we're not going to do that right now because in the future, you're going to want to do it differently. And that's your job as a parent. And that's hard. It's a lot of work, but it's your job. So, and that was a beautiful thing that my mom was able, just in a little quick moment, she said to me.
After she had said that, when the three of us had had a conversation, one of the next nights we were at her parents' house, and Ruben wanted a piece of candy, and we were gonna have some amazing homemade dessert right after dinner. And this concept flashed through my head of we're actually already doing this process, telling them this is a good thing, but this is what you're waiting for. This is the direction that you're going. And I think we actually do that all throughout our kids' life. And just to put sexuality and pornography through that lens helps set the stage for how you communicate it really well. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about, there's something kind of underneath that is more important, and this sounds weird considering what the event's about, almost more important than the specific conversation around sexuality. And so this one, however long you guys want to talk about this is one of our keystone things that I really want to dig into. How do we set up an environment in our families for our kids to have these types of conversations? Because whether it's going to be sexuality, whether it's going to be dating, whether it's going to be alcohol, whatever that is, how do we develop that type of family environment where you can have hard conversations?
I can talk about this because my family did this really, really well. My family talked about everything. Like, there was nothing. We would sit at the table and we all would just be sitting there, and my dad would go, "What did you do today? What did you think about that?" And we would sit there and analyze everything that happened to everybody's day. That took a lot of time, but we did it. And there was nothing that like they didn't talk about. And so because we had that environment of like, we just talk about everything you did that day. And my parents were sleuths, and I realize that now. You would come back from a sleepover and they would be like, "What games did you play?" And we're like, "Oh, we played Two Truths and a Lie." And my mom was like, "Oh, really? I don't like that game." And I was like, "Why?" And she's like, "Well, it can make you do uncomfortable things. Did anything uncomfortable happen?" And I was like, "Actually, yeah." And do you know what I mean? Like, there was always a conversation of like, "Tell me more about that." And that environment of like, we just talked. And then as teenagers, it became, actually wasn't teenagers, we lived out of town, and my dad would always pick one of us to ride home with him, and you knew you were going to get the conversation. And something that my dad did really, really well is he would ask me, he was like, "Denny, has anybody ever made you feel uncomfortable?" And he would just leave it. And it was a great moment because I was able to like reflect on like anything, especially as like somebody doesn't want to like disrupt the vibe. It allowed me to disrupt the vibe and be like, "Actually, this happened," or "This didn't happen." Um, and just the ability to talk about things and not make it weird. I remember being like 10. Most of these conversations started at 10, and then I'll be done talking, sorry. My dad would ask me, "Who do you have a crush on?" And I would be like, and then he'd be like, "Well, what about this boy from church? I think he's a really good kid. I noticed how he opens the door for his mom. That's a good skill. That means he's going to be respectful. That's a good thing to look for in a spouse." And they would do that with everybody I hung out with. Any friend that I had, that's a good friend. They talk very highly of people. And every once in a while, it was a corrective thing of like, "Hey, I don't like you hanging out with that friend. They're a gossip. And I don't want your character to be like that." Taking moments to talk to your kids about things that are deeper and get them thinking about life in a way that isn't just surface level of let's have fun, let's do things just for fun. It was like who you surround yourself with matters, and their character matters, and your character matters. And those conversations, just keeping it open all the time. Like, for the love of God, look your kids in the eyeballs and ask them how their day went. You wouldn't believe how many kids don't get that these days. And I mean that. Like, it's very sad. But if you do that, I think you have a leg up among all their peers.
I'm going to piggyback off of what she said for a second. And I want to say this delicately because some of them were students of parents in our church that have said this, where Denny or myself has asked them a question and they were like, "I wish my parents would talk to me about that. They just look at their phone." Like, your students
That happens
notice
all the time.
And
it happens all the time, like on a weekly basis.
With like what we would consider this sounds bad, but what we would consider our like church kids. Like, this happens all the time. And so one of the things that I'm even just going to put in there, the environment for having tough conversations may not be there because we're having a lack of conversations in general. And so whatever it looks like for you to prioritize moments of those real conversations or just regular conversations at the dinner table, in the car, wherever that is, like, prioritize those.
Yeah, there's not really any way around it except to take the time to do this, right? There's not an easy fix. Like, if you're never sitting down and having dinner around a table, you should focus on just that. Just change one thing. Like, hey, okay, it may not be for I raised 3 children who were in 3 sports all the time, and my husband was a coach. It was not easy to have consistent, it wasn't like every Friday night's pizza night at our house. It didn't work like that because every Friday night was a football game. But we still made sure that several times throughout the week we were all sitting down at that table. Maybe not every Monday, but at least once, twice, 3 times a week. We made that a priority. We used to say, right, we've all heard it, like the family that prays together stays together. And I believe the family that plays together also stays together. So I would encourage you to find things that you have in common with your child and enjoy them together, right? If it's hiking or camping or skiing or whatever it is, but doing those things together is going to build time and trust with your kids. And there's just no way to avoid investing the time. And there's nothing better to do than invest your time in your kids, other than your spouse probably. Like that's pretty important too. But I think that they said it really well. It's looking your kid in the eye, having normal conversations, and then having the hard conversations, right? But if you establish a pattern that, hey, we're a safe place to talk about, right? Something bad happened at school today, and the first thing isn't that my parents jumped down my throat at the dinner table, right? They're like, well, tell me about that. Like, what happened? And instead of just reacting, like I said. So having those conversations. Go ahead. That's it.
Yeah, I definitely had your very succinct response in my head of like, we respond, we don't react. Like, I just have never been steered wrong by asking a question versus passing a judgment. Like, it's just always the best first move to be like, hey, tell me why you thought that. When we talk about like sexuality, especially tomorrow, like one of the things that can really scare us as parents and people is like for example, let's take a little girl who comes up to us and says, I don't really like being a girl. And sometimes these alarm bells go off and we're like, well, we have to talk to them about their gender identity and how it matches their biological sex and the idea of that, we have to like, and we just like, we're all just, and you might instead just say, well, why not? And she'll go, I just don't like having to like pee sitting down. Like it might just be something really chill.
I'd hate that too, truthfully. Like, sounds terrible.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, and I honestly, I cannot remember if I just made that up or if that is a conversation I've had with my daughter. But like, seriously, like, it's just like sometimes kids can be curious or ask questions or say things or look at things or do things for a million reasons. And we just have to be so careful that we don't react so strongly because it just pushes them out. I would also say that like we have to find a better answer than I'll tell you when you're older, because I promise you, as a kid who was not saved and whose parents were, I was born when my mom and dad were 40 and had already been raising 3 other kids. And by the time I was like in elementary school, they were like, do what you want, kid. Like I said, my dad gave very short advice. We moved on. But there were times where I would ask, and my dad wouldn't tell me. And I guarantee you, every single time, I can tell you probably, if you give me some time to remember, how many terms about sex I learned from friends on the playground in first grade. Because my parents wouldn't tell me, and I wasn't going to stop asking the question. So I just find somebody to tell me. And for curious kids, which we've all met the kid who's just like, why? It's just not going to stop. So you might as well like find an answer. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing. It's not like, hey, let me launch into this whole thing. It's just like, but we have to say something age appropriate, something short, something that communicates care and understanding on their level and maybe says, hey, maybe not right now, but I promise you, I think this is a good conversation in a year or 6 months, or hey, let me get back to you, or hey, let's start the conversation here, and I promise you as you get older, we'll build on it. I always want you to come to me with, for answers. I also, oh man, I had a thought and it might be gone, it's okay. Yeah, that's apparently it. Thanks, Jesus.
I'm going to add just a little bit to this because of the things that we're talking about. This type of environment for parents to be able to have conversations with their kids is the thing that I'm the most passionate about. And the 2 things that I would say is one, there's a certain personality type and age demographic that their response to when kids are questioning or inquisitive because it's uncomfortable will be to tease and make fun of. And it's normally done in love. Well, even when your kid is talking about they have a crush on somebody, and when you respond with teasing and making fun of, it immediately shuts them down and immediately tells them you're not a person they can trust with that information. And it's easy to do, because especially if you're like me and I cope with things with humor, because that's easier for me. It's so easy. So this is to myself as much as I'm saying it to anybody else. But taking a breath when your student or kid tells you something, it goes with the responding instead of reacting. Part of responding is you can't do it in a moment's notice. You have to take a second. But especially with the taking the things and realizing, even if it's not that important in the grand scheme of things, your 7-year-old who has a crush on the other 7-year-old is not serious in the grand scheme of things, but it's serious to them. And so how you handle it is crucial. The second thing, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, truthfully, and I see it in students all the time, I can tell you which students, their parents unintentionally thought of them as a burden, and they never said it in words, but they said things like, man, I just can't wait to get a vacation, and so the kids are with the grandparents or something like that. Statements like that, they don't seem like they mean anything in the moment. But what you say around your kids when they can hear you has an impact on what they're going to come and talk to you with. And so things that make them seem like you are just putting up with them, why would they trust you to come and talk to you about the crucial things in their life? And so it's easy to do, and again, I'm saying this to myself as much as anybody, but it's important that even in our side conversations with other parents in the room, that we are uplifting our kids and that we are thankful that they're there and they're not a burden. They're a responsibility, but they're not a burden.
Real quick, I remembered my thought.
Perfect.
And it's important to me because it was one of these like defining moments of childhood. So I have ADHD, not just like the TikTok version of ADHD, but like went through the whole diagnosis and like took medication for a long time and still struggle with it at times. Like forgetting entirely what I was talking about. I remember specifically as an upper elementary schooler, walking in to my house and seeing my mom sitting on the couch reading a book titled The Gift of ADHD. And it just like permanently altered how I viewed myself, that my parents were willing to learn about anything if it meant parenting their child better. ADHD is the art of being too much. And like my dad loved him to death, but he took the teasing route. He's like, I mean, I had the jokes of like, Joe, I'm tired of you thinking your name's too quiet, but you got to calm down. Hey, don't touch anything in this story. Hey, this is an AB conversation. Hey, you're just, and I mean, fair. Like I get it, but my mom was willing to learn. I talked to my mom about everything because I walked into a room and she was just like, I would like to understand more about the kid that I'm trying to raise. And I just, like, it goes back to what I said about the stigma of education. It's like, we get to this point where we're like, well, it's embarrassing to have to admit what I don't know. And I'm like, it's more embarrassing to have to, like, deal with the fruits of our ignorance. It's more embarrassing to have to deal with we joke about it all the time. We say things in sermons like, well, you should parent better because if you don't correct your kid, the law will have to do it later. Like, it's more embarrassing publicly when we don't put in the work, later in life. But if we can say, man, I'm trying to like understand you, it just sends such a powerful message. And so I just didn't want that to be missed, because again, if your kid starts to emerge with a host of different conversations or issues, I mean, if your kid is curious about a topic that's hard, or if they do get diagnosed with something, it's like, man, show them that you want to learn about them. And it just communicates so much love in a world that will probably teach them nothing but misunderstanding, So that was just a thought.
That's perfect. I tell my youth leaders that if a kid cracks the door open, do everything in your power to kick it as wide open as possible. Like, when this is the positive side of, if they give an inch, take a mile. Because if they open up, we want to be the first person that they are as open with as possible. And sometimes we do something or say something that accidentally slams the door instead. And just being intentional and keeping that as a part of our mentality going into it. Some of these kind of go together, so we're kind of going to go in the same direction. How do we combat an incredibly over-sexualized culture? And so part of this, and we can go even more specific, but anything from the things kids and students are talking about to online to any of that conversation. How do we uphold a biblical sexual ethic and combat an over-sexualized culture?
I want to start because all I got is like a brief one-liner. Lied every preacher ever. But I do really think very short thought is like, if we're worried about a bright burning fire, build a better fire. You know what I'm saying? Like, just do it. Like the only way to combat a strong culture is to build a stronger one within your home. We can control that, and it makes out there less scary because then we have the dominant voice in the room. My wife and I have chosen to public school our kids, and this is not a value statement because I think there are right reasons to do homeschooling, Christian schooling, public schooling, all those things. And we've debated. I mean, there still might be a day where we say, hey, this is not the right environment. But for now, one of the things that's reassured me is I'm like, I know that my kids will encounter things that are not of our values, but we are building stronger values. And I'm confident in that. Not arrogant. Like, obviously, there could come a day where I'm like, this is not it. You know what I'm saying? But for now, I'm like, we are going to be people who build stronger values.
That's great. You said it actually better than I did this time. So, obviously, there's a practical side to limiting exposure as much as you can to things, right? That's obviously, we're not just giving our kids, the Netflix remote and the Wi-Fi password to watch whatever they want to watch. So yes, there have to be limits to limit exposure. We had a rule, no PG-13 movies till you're 13. There was no exceptions. And Linnea watched a lot of animated films on Thanksgiving because Cameron was too young for the good movies still. So that was the deal. And then even just because they were 13 did not mean they could watch whatever they wanted. But having the limits is really important. One of the things I wrote is the world shouts loud about sex as a substitute for what we were really designed for. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but helping our children pursue healthy intimacy will lead to a more balanced view of sexuality. A hungry need is a dangerous need. And if our children aren't feeling loved and valued and have strong relationships, then they're going to seek for that in other ways. So it comes down to what he just said. Create an environment for your children that gives them something better. And I will tell you, of the responses from my children, the absolute joy of my life was that 2 of them said in their responses, I think you just taught us there were better things to pursue. You taught us to find happiness in other things. And that was important. So the world is not going to get less sexualized. If you're waiting for that to happen, it's never going to happen.
Yes.
It's probably just going to get worse. And so build a bigger fire, right? Create intimacy and relationships with your family that gives them a reason to not need that. There were some practical things. I specifically remember talking to one of my children. They had a goal. Well, all of my children had goals. And if you know my kids, they are overachievers. And it's really hard to do this without telling my own kids stories and respecting their privacy. But for this specific instance, I think it's okay. Girls have it harder. I hate to say it in terms of the consequences that can come to our life, right? Through sexual.
Yeah, no disagree. I'm like, yes, women deserve more holidays. Let's talk about that, all right? Let's go.
But my daughter had a goal. She wanted to play college volleyball. And I was like, all right, the reality is this. If you get pregnant, that goal's probably going to go out the window. I hate to say it like that, but it's just the reality, right? It doesn't mean the end of the world, but my kids had goals. And even one of my sons said that, I had goals, and you made it really clear that these are some things that could really wreck my dreams. And it wasn't just fear. It was there's this great thing that I want to do with my life. And so that's building a bigger fire, right? Creating dreams and goals for their future that give them something to work toward. And it's one more reason to do the right thing. So.
You're good. The only thing I'll add is don't be afraid to use non-spiritual realities to reinforce a spiritual truth.
Amen.
Like the book of Leviticus is full of all of these laws that weren't based around their spirituality. Some of them were literally like, hey, stop sticking yourself with needles that other people have used. Like, you're gonna get sick and die. Like, God gave them very practical laws sometimes to help them not die. And so with our kids, you can give real world consequences as guardrails for why they shouldn't or should do something. And there's nothing
one of
wrong
my
with that.
favorite statements is like using that conversation with alcohol. I'm like, I don't have to be a Christian to give you a million reasons not to get drunk. Like my parents drank way too much, and I'm like, listen, I don't even have to love the Lord to be like, there's a lot of bad juju out there if you're gonna go down that road, you know? I don't use the word juju, to be clear, but you know.
As silly as it sounds, we used to say to our children, nothing good happens after midnight and nothing good happens in the horizontal position. They heard that from our mouth multiple times.
Write that down.
Like, and we would just say it and they would roll their eyes and they would like, whatever. But that's what we would say, like, hey, have fun. Remember, nothing good happens in the horizontal position. And that was just something we said to our kids.
Someone who runs church camps can confirm.
Absolutely insane. In this same conversation, though, what are some good tools, and even get practical and pragmatic about how to help kids navigating social media? Because the other part of this is the self-image conversation. But with social media, sexuality, a sexualized culture, self-image, how do we help navigate and give good direction for our kids?
I really enjoy, sometimes I think we get in our own heads where we're like, oh, a kid is going to demand social media, and like there's so much pressure from their friends, like we have to give it to them. And I'm like, I am very okay describing social media in the same terms I use driving. I'm like, no, you are not allowed to drive a car. That's absurd. You know, you're like 10, can't even reach the pedals. And like, it's okay. Like my wife and I like because smartphones are such a present reality in all our lives now. This is the tech, you know. I have been very okay being like, yeah, hey, my daughter is 7. I'm like, this is a tool and it has amazing uses. And I know sometimes we watch funny videos and we have Spotify and do those things. I said, but when you are old enough, this is going to be a tool that probably helps you with a good chunk of your life. Like it becomes, sure, I'm not denying them the ultimate goal of being plugged into social media or being plugged into a phone or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, it is okay to treat it seriously because it's serious business, even if that's not the message they're getting from other places. My dad didn't do it right, but he did make sure when I first got behind the wheel of a car to say, this is a half-ton death machine and it could ruin your life if you hit somebody. And I was like, all right. And again, this is one of those, I read a book called Addicted by a guy named Adam Alter, and it came out in like 2016. And again, I don't need a Christian reason. I just have hard data to like talk about how bad social media is for their brains. And sometimes it's just as simple as that, as saying, hey, this is a very adult tool, and I want to teach you as you grow up in measured steps how to use this tool. And it's okay to take it seriously, you know?
I think with a lot of the girls that I talk to, one of the scariest things for me is that I see it in their eyes the day that they get Snapchat.
Brutal.
There's never been a student where I haven't looked at them and been like, did you get Snapchat this week? And been wrong. It changes something in their eyes, and it scares the heck out of me. And I say that like out of just like what are we doing here? I grew up with Snapchat, but my parents had very like strict boundaries around social media, and it was very new, and they didn't know a lot of things. And thank God, like I wasn't super techie because I didn't get myself into trouble. But I can see it in their eyes, and I guarantee you, your daughter, your son is not the exception. I also have had more than one student who is 14, 13 come up to me like, hey, my friend's older friend who is like 19 sent me a picture of his penis. Oh, can we go to the police? But I'm not kidding you, and I'm not saying that to scare you, but I am saying that to scare you. because your kid is not the exception. But I think having those conversations of like, this is a place where you will be sexualized, where you will hear jokes that make you curious, where you will hear words that you're like, what does that mean? And it's not for you. It's not the right time for you. I'm not saying that you should never have social media. They probably should have it in the home so you can help them navigate that, in my opinion, because it is such an addictive thing. But knowing and having those honest conversations with your kids, especially your girls, because we know Instagram Reels, and like we've hard data that Instagram Reels affects girls' brains differently, and the correlation between self-harm and anxiety and depression with Instagram, specifically with girls, is not correlational, it's causational. It's not an if, it's a when. It's not an if, it's a when. If your kids will see somebody scantily clothed, it's not an if. I mean, we have a couple in our life group, and he was like, man, I wish my parents knew about like technology. I saw people get murdered online, and it changed my brain. It's not a joke. But the other side of it is they will feel left out. A super practical thing, don't keep old tech in your house. They do use it as their burner phone when you take their phone. And I'm not kidding you, it happens every time. That iPhone 4, it still connects to Wi-Fi. It still connects to Snapchat. Talk to them. Say, hey, have any of your friends, do any of them like use a second phone? Like, because we have students that can't have certain apps, and their friends will let them log into their account on their phone at school. It's not a joke. It's a real thing. They treat it like alcohol. It's crazy. Like the way that I look at it, I'm like, calm down. Camp when they can't have their phones, it's crazy the loops that they jump through to keep those snap streaks.
It's okay to be the ones who are left out. Like, it just is. It's kind of funny because we didn't have TV almost our entire kids' lives. Like, we just didn't have it. And it was like, they'd come home and they'd be like, Mom, there's this show. And I'm like, yeah, we don't have TV. We can't watch that. You know, like, and yes, were there times when it was like, it's not fair. If you asked my children the things that were etched into their brains, if you say it's not fair at our house, you get life's not fair all the time. Like, they don't say it because they know that that's the answer, but it's okay to be the one without the cell phone. And then we were very clear that when they did get a cell phone, it wasn't theirs. It was ours, and we were letting them use it, which meant we had permission to pick that phone up. There was no passcodes, there was nothing. We could pick that phone up at any time. We can read their text messages. We could see what apps they were on, anything like that. Like, nope, that is our phone. It's not yours, right? And so that's practical. That's just practical. If you're going to let them have a phone, make sure they know that it's yours. Super simple. We've heard some of the rules, like don't keep it in their bedroom at night. Make them charge it in the kitchen, not in their bedroom.
I am frequently amazed. And again, I think this just comes from like the youth pastor perspective, because we know that like youth pastors are not the smartest people in the room. I get it. You know what I'm saying? Like, not present company excluded. We're pretty good. A couple 12 out of 10s like us. We're doing all right. But all that to say, I was constantly amazed at the number of people who walked into the youth group and were like, yeah, I have an Xbox and a phone and a TV and like unrestricted internet access in my room 24/7. And I have never wanted to throat punch parents so hard. I'm like one of the single most addictive, lawless. Do you know how many racial slurs I learned because of online video gaming? Do you know how many sexual jokes I heard? Do you know how much innocence was ruined from simple internet access? Like, it's so absurd to me. And I'm like, I get it. Like, the incessant desire, the steps you've already said yes to that create a really difficult situation when you try and pull back. But it's just so pervasive that I have never seen it help a kid. Not once have I been like, man, that kid's life was improved in any marginal way. And so it creates this like strong response where I'm like, It is sometimes as simple as just saying like, no, that will not be allowed 24/7. They need to sleep. There was a guy who came and did a school assembly, and I borrowed his language because it was really good. But he was talking about social media, and he was talking about how social media has basically turned everybody into like the child star syndrome, where like we watch child stars grow up and they go nuts because they've never been allowed to develop in private. And everything they do is publicly scrutinized. And what he said is, he said, let me give you two scenarios. He said, let's take the, 1980s, 1990s, whatever, before there was smartphones and tech and internet and all that stuff. There was no technology in the 80s. Everyone knows that. So I'm just kidding. But what would happen? A kid gets bullied at school, right? They are home now, okay? And so they might have a diary, and they write down, they journal their thoughts. Turns out really healthy, okay? And they might talk to their immediate group. They might have a friend, but it's usually like the nuclear family and whoever's around, right? Then they go up to their room. They have no way to communicate with anybody else, so they just go, they might cry themselves to sleep because they hated it so much, but they'll go to bed at like 10 o'clock, sleep for 8 hours, wake up the next day, and have had a full human experience with that bullying. Let's do the opposite now. If a kid has unrestricted access to technology, they're gonna come home, not talk to their parents, and they'll take the phone up to their room. Then they will stay up till 3 a.m. talking to people whose prefrontal cortex is just as absent as their own, who will work them into a whipped up frenzy of emotion and pain and turmoil and judgment. I mean, this is where we get kids coming up and being like, I was in a group chat at 4 a.m. and my kids and my friends said they wanted to kill themselves. And I'm like, yeah, because none of you just went to bed. None of you just cried yourself to sleep and went to bed. It's fine. You'll wake up feeling that cathartic release of grief. Okay? Like, I'm sorry, I got fired up, but I'm like, it is crazy to me that like we still have this where I'm like, you got to stop this. Like, it's nuts, you know?
And a lot of this elicits very visceral responses, like Joe was saying. And I am going to double down on what Denny said. There are levels to this when it comes to social media and internet access. Like, yes, all of it needs to be monitored, but I don't think you understand the lack of control you as a parent have over Snapchat specifically. If I could erase one social media off the face of the planet and save probably 100,000 students from killing themselves.
Why would it be Facebook?
No, I can't live without Marketplace, Joe. I can't do it. But I can't communicate this enough. There's nothing good to be gained from it. Nothing. And so that leads me to a question, though, that's really hard. You touched on it. It's a really, really hard question. If you have allowed some of this, whether it's unrestricted access to technology or it's things like Snapchat, how do you recorrect? And obviously the simple answer is just be the parent, but that's not a good enough answer for me. Because there's an intricacy to this. We're trying to develop a real relationship with our kids. How do you course correct when maybe you've given too much freedom?
Do it together. Like have a family sit down and be like, hey, I didn't know this information and I just found out. And I care and I love you so much. And I realize this is a big sacrifice and this is gonna be really uncomfortable, but we're gonna do it all together. And let them see you be uncomfortable as well. Because there's something so cool that happens when you do a hard thing and an uncomfortable thing with somebody else. Some of my best memories as a kid were loading firewood, not because I like loading firewood, I don't, but because I did it with my whole family and we were singing stupid songs and it was a great time. Do you know what I mean? Like, the best movies that we watch is a road trip gone wrong. Because it's fun, it's bonding, and make it that. Like, if you have gone too far with tech, reel it back in, be like, we're gonna do this together. We'll get the brick or whatever you need to do, and say like, okay, we're gonna do a family movie night, like on Fridays. That's gonna be our tech time for the month. And then we will reevaluate after that. We'll all see how it is after that. That's my stance.
I would say, how much is it worth to you? My dad really hated TV and video games, and I look back on it now and think of how silly it was. But like, he offered me and my sister $500 each if we could go an entire year without watching movies, except when we did like family movie nights. I lost in 3 days. And my sister, I think she probably snuck it, but she somehow got the money. But like, how much is it worth to you? Like, if we believe this stuff will wreck their life, how much is that worth to you? Like, is it worth the pain? I also like the phrase reduce and replace. I think too often we just look at a kid and say, stop doing that. And then instead of being on their tech all evening, they're gonna what? Watch paint dry? Do family game nights. Have more conversation around the dinner table. Go do something fun. Put in the legwork of making quality time. Build a bigger fire, right? Because again, you're not just taking away, you're reducing and replacing. And Denny's note on humility, gosh, like if I ever look at my kid after they get a cell phone and say, hey, put your cell phone away, I'm probably gonna be doing it like this. Hey, put your cell phone away. You gotta stop doing that. And it's my responsibility to say I have to limit my tech. And like if the TV's in your room, you know? Yeah, it's just like if the TV's in your room too, then you're just a hypocrite. And like you can be like, well, yeah, but we're following that one show. And I'm like, follow it in the living room. Like just, sorry. Like there's just, how much is it worth to you? Because that sets the tone, you know? Again, not easy, but simple, you know?
And again, it's if you go home and suddenly like throw every piece of tech in your house into the garbage,
put it in a blender.
That's a reaction, not a response, right? But it is okay if you feel like it's gotten ahead of you to, like Denise said, to say like, gosh, I'm really sorry. I didn't know this. I didn't do a very good job of protecting you from this. Let's talk about how to fix that, right? It doesn't have to be this knee-jerk reaction like, oh my gosh, you know, throw everything away. And
run over the Xbox
whatever,
with a lawnmower.
You know.
Put it on YouTube, make millions.
So, okay.
And just like in general, anytime I feel like I have been a part of influencing a culture where I'm at, it normally started with me saying, hey, this is the part that I don't think I did really well. And it made me think like, what if we did it this way? And as a parent, nothing will be more powerful than you admitting, you know what, I don't know if I was 100% right in this area, but this is where I think we should go. It's not giving away influence. You're actually buying influence with your authenticity. Your students are desperate for that type of interaction, even from a parent. I know we're getting close on time, so we're going to transition to some. Man, transition wasn't the word I wanted to use for this part.
Why? What's the subject?
That's crazy.
Before we,
Yeah.
I know what you're going to say. We're going to transition to some LGBTQ stuff, but I just had a couple final thoughts just that I wanted to share.
Totally.
Number one, remember that your identity is not wrapped up in your kids' behavior. Some of you will have children who make choices that you disagree with, right? That does not mean that you are a failure, okay? It's important that you understand that you made choices that probably your parents, and it's okay to look at your child and say, that's not what I would have chosen for you. But I love you, right? Like, your identity is not your child. So I just want to say that because none of us, we're not getting through this unscathed. I hate to say it. Like, we all want our children to be perfect and do the right thing, and I wish that it was that simple. It's probably not going to happen. So remember that your identity is not wrapped up in that. And lastly, I actually wrote this down just when I got here. The goal of all of this is not to get your kid to the marriage altar as a virgin. Like, that is not the goal. And I feel like that's where purity culture was. Like, we just had to get him to the marriage altar as a virgin. That is a byproduct, if that happens, of what we're trying to do here, right? Having that relationship with your children that sets them up for success, that's the goal, is to have a relationship with your children that you can look at down the road and be like, man, we really learned this together. Like, we worked hard at this together and we're still friends, right? Like, we still talk to each other. And so those are just some final thoughts that I had. I wanted to read, can I read one scripture verse really quick? Actually, I think John Michael used this scripture in his message the other day, but I want to read it out of the Message. And it's 1 Corinthians 16 through 20. It says, there's more to sex than mere skin on skin. Sex is as much, yes, this is in the Bible. Sex is as much spiritual mystery as physical fact. As written in Scripture, the two become one. Since we want to become spiritually one with the Master, we must not pursue the kind of sex that avoids commitment and intimacy, leaving us more lonely than ever. The kind of sex that can never become one. There is a sense in which sexual sins are different from all others. In sexual sin, we violate the sacredness of our own bodies, these bodies that were made for God-given and God-modeled love for becoming one with another. And I just loved the picture that painted as parents of trying to say to them, like, again, this intimacy that you're going to crave and desire, this is a part of that God created for you to have. This is going to be an amazing, positive thing down the road. So I just wanted to add those thoughts.
Huge. We're going to shift to a conversation around LGBTQ.
I believe we're going to transition to
Transitioned. Perfect. And there were more questions that were sent in that I really do want to come back to. And so once we kind of go through this process, it may be just like a little extra time and you are not committed to staying to that, but we're going to see if we can circle back to some of those at the end. And you may hear more from Joe than from the other ones during this time, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you guys have anything you want to add, feel free. First one, and this one I feel like is the most important for people who, the number one thing I hear from Christians who genuinely care is they're like, I don't know what the right words to say when even referencing people that are in the LGBTQ community. Like, do we say they're gay? Do we say they're homosexual? What do we say? So kind of talk to us about vocabulary. How do we approach this?
Yeah, I think it's hard because similar to our fun game at the beginning of this night, how many of you know that slang, what's acceptable, unacceptable, has baggage, doesn't have baggage, it changes constantly. And like, it is so difficult as people, parents, church members, churchgoers, like it's just really hard to be like, how am I gonna like say the right thing at the right time? It's really difficult to say the right thing at the right time all the time. So like embrace, the idea that you're probably gonna mess it up occasionally. But the concept I want you to keep in mind is like, when you say a phrase out loud, how do you think like it sounds or makes someone feel? Like, does it make them feel othered? Because I don't think anybody likes to feel othered or labeled. Like if someone walked up to you and said, "Oh, you're being such a Karen," and you're like, I don't know, being disruptive in a restaurant or challenging how well done your steak should or should not be, or fighting with the HOA, I don't know, like whatever it is. But like if I walked up to you and just said, "Oh, you're being such a Karen," man, it's just like something in you goes like, I don't like that she just like made me a label and not a person. I think a lot of our cues can be drawn from like how we talk about addiction also. Like, man, it's easy to condemn an alcoholic until you know one or have been one. You know what I'm saying? But our language changes because we go, there is a person behind what I'm saying. Okay? So I just want us to focus deeply on this idea of like othered language. Like whenever we are reducing somebody, so like if you say something that reduces somebody to a generalized statement, like, oh yeah, they're just pushing the gay agenda. Society might push a gay agenda. Individuals are not an agenda. They're just people, To reduce somebody entirely to their sexual orientation is really debasing of them as people. So when you say, oh yeah, that's just one of the gays, it's like, okay, well, let's not just reduce them to one aspect of who they are, just like we don't want to be reduced to one aspect of who we are. I really hate the phrase, okay, boomer, mostly because teenagers start doing it to me sometimes. And I just hate it because it makes me feel old, And I don't like that. Why? Because it's a dismissive conversation ender, not an inviting conversation starter. Specifically speaking, I have found currently, and I think it's going to stick this way for a long time, that a very neutral term is to say somebody who is either in the LGBTQ community or somebody who's on the spectrum of LGBTQ or someone who identifies as LGBTQ, but that's like a very broad term that doesn't have to get in the nitty-gritty of like, well, is it gay or lesbian or trans or this or that? It's just like, so when I'm referencing it in conversation, And you'll hear it in my sermon tomorrow. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, that gay guy over there, or that lesbian guy. I'm just going to leave it very broad. Be like, oh yeah, someone who's on the LGBTQ spectrum. And I know it sounds longer to say, but that little ounce of care can really prevent us from just kind of like already walking into a heavy conversation. It's like we don't have to go quite guns loaded. And so just being careful about that term specifically. But I think it's more about what mindset we're in. And again, if we start showing compassion to people and they come around us, you will learn things by just talking to them and treating them as people.
I love that. What should we do as parents if we have a student who is maybe they're good friends with somebody they grew up with, but they decide to pursue being a part of the LGBTQ community, or your family is around somebody, maybe an aunt or an uncle decides that's the direction they would like to go. How do you walk your student through that in an age-appropriate manner that also doesn't teach them to isolate that person?
Good news, you don't. Next question. I'm just kidding. That question could take us like 45 minutes, okay? Like it's a big question, but I'm going to give a few bite-sized thoughts. Number one, I still think that like building a bigger fire is such an important conversation. Like, and it goes with a lot of what we said. Like, if you haven't started yet, start now. Like by promoting, communicating, and holding biblical ethic in your home, you will create a strong culture that counters the messages they're hearing. Like we are starting with our kids at very young ages to be like, yeah, the Bible is God's source of truth. Why? Because that's going to help them when they encounter people saying there are other sources of truth, like a lot of these ideologies that pop up in society. Or I might say, yeah, God's design really is important. Man, it is imperative that if God is the creator, that then we live in a way that honors the way he intended us to be made. Like there's theology that builds the scaffolding around this conversation. I would say, speaking very pragmatically, I would say, number one, that statement of like respond, don't react is just so key. Because of where society's at, a lot of us might remember being in middle school and like trying on different identities as a hat, where it's like, am I a jock? Am I a nerd? Am I introverted, extroverted? Am I this? Am I that? And unfortunately or fortunately or whatever, like, am I LGBTQ just becomes another like identity hat to try on. So I say this with like nuance, I guess, but like don't take it too seriously. Don't not take it seriously. But like, again, it goes back to that like mosquito and bazooka thing. I'm like, leading with judgment versus leading with questions is just a different way to parent. It's a different way to have the conversation. Hey, what about that makes you feel that way? Where did this message come from for you? Why is this a conversation you're having right now? I haven't heard you talk like this before. Why the sudden interest in it? You know what I'm saying? Like, where is this coming from? Would you mind just telling me how you feel about that? It is not a sin to ask somebody to clarify what they're feeling. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not you're not agreeing with them by just asking questions of interest. And so I would say that like when our students are struggling with that, there is hard data out there to suggest that like those who are coming to parents who will be honest, who will ask questions, who will build a strong culture. There's some data that sometimes even goes as high as 85 or 90% of people, especially in the trans part of the conversation, people who believe they're a different gender, than their biological sex. There is data out there that says a lot of people outgrow that. Like it's probably around puberty and these other times where they're getting mixed signals about their body and their worth and all these different things. And so we can lean into the fact that they'll get through it. But what they're looking for in that moment is often what a toddler's looking for when they're 2. I mean, a toddler chucks something breakable into a wall and they just stare at you because they want to know if you're still going to love them in that moment. Like they're pushing boundaries to know that they're asking the question, do you still care? And like, that's what a teenager's kind of asking you. Like, I'm going to say the most ridiculous thing, push the most aggressive identity, and they're just wanting to know if you still love them, if you're willing to read, to learn, to grow. Because, again, it still goes back to this idea of like, my mom read a book on ADHD because she just wanted to care about me the best she could. And like, we do. We need to work on it. As far as like company, like, hey, if someone really seems drawn to an individual, I love Denny's answer from earlier about like, model for your kids the kind of people that you believe set them up for a good future. Not offensively. Like, don't walk around church and be like, hey, you like, don't like walk up to the kid in kids church and be like, okay, so this is the one I was telling you about. Do not be like them, okay? Like, that's not the move. But you can say things like, man, I really admire how they did that. I really love how they walked that way. Hey, I recognize you want to be close to them, but we have, you know, as your parents, we believe that this is kind of a close inner circle for you, and like, we're much more okay. And like, you have control over who comes to your house. Like, again, if they're like, all I want to do is hang out with that friend, I'm not saying you can like be like, that friend's not coming over, but you can say, hey, I reached out, I would love for you to invite over whoever, like, encourage them to bring around those people that you know are good influences, you know? So again, it could be 45 minutes, and I would love to have more questions later, but.
Something that you said in you taught a class on this at a district event a couple years back. And you said that if a middle school comes to you and says, I am in love with whoever opposite gender person, you're going to take their emotions seriously, but you're not going to take them seriously because they're in middle school and they're still processing that. And handle the emotions with the respect of like they're a person feeling things, but it's not always this like massively identity defining thing.
That's a perfect example because again, we don't discount a middle school relationship, but not a single one of us should ever be like, oh my gosh, you're gonna marry that person, it's gonna ruin your life. Why? Because it's gonna be done in a week, okay? Like, just chill, okay? Like, maybe even 3 days tops, okay? I don't know.
Let's say a week is nuts. There's not a chance.
Yeah, so I do think there's that balance of like, yeah, we care and we're gonna engage, but like, don't try and just blow it up. I'm like, this is not a nuclear strike moment.
I think what happens in our parent heart is like something like the LGBT, we're used to the crushes,
yes,
but an LGBTQ scares us, right? Like it scares us. And so we react out of that fear. And if you're reacting out of fear, you're probably gonna not do the right thing. So again, take that time that you need. Always, you can buy yourself some time to figure out a response because fear is not what we want to approach our children with in any subject. So
some of the best well-meaning students that I've met can be some of the harshest when it comes to these conversations. And sometimes it's a byproduct of what they think they hear from their parents to how they then respond to the community around them. How can we as parents teach our students to stand by the convictions that we've taught them, but that in a way that's gentle and respectful, not combative and defensive? How do we help students navigate what we're trying to navigate ourselves?
To make sure I understand you, you're saying these are students who are trying to live out their Christian beliefs, who are interacting with LGBTQ individuals, and we're saying how do we coach them on like how to do that with the love of Christ, the truth of God, all those things hand in hand.
Correct, because they don't, a lot of students, prefrontal cortex, the development hasn't reached the spot of intuitively, I say that, but some adults don't intuitively think of others before themselves. But in general, how do you navigate that with students?
I would just, again, the hardest part about this conversation is there's truly not like formulas to a lot of this. That's what I think is hard about, let's be honest, that's what's hard about parenting generally, okay, is that there's not like you're like, that worked yesterday, and then the next day it's like, that's the worst decision we've ever made today. Like it just doesn't, and it doesn't end with toddlers, I've heard. I'm worried that like when my kids are teenagers, it's not gonna be great either. But I'm gonna say, I apply this statement to life and ministry. I apply it to my own parents. My mom and dad love them to death. My mom was raised Catholic. My dad was raised Jehovah's Witness. I'm a Pentecostal. There's a bad joke in there somewhere. I don't know what happened. But my dad is very far from a perfect dad. I love him to death, but like, lot to unpack there, okay? Like several years of good therapy that me and Nadine are gonna have about like unpacking that, okay? But one of the things I remember about my dad that translated into my Christian faith, that translates into my ministry, trying is winning. And I need you to hear that. if you are making an effort to push back the tide, to learn something, to engage the best you know how, apologizing when you screw it up, try something new the next day, try it again the next day, you are the winner as a parent. However they turn out, you will have given your best effort. And that matters. That's the win. You're right. Like, I mean, Nadine said earlier, like, you can't ultimately, like, these kids are just going to do things. And you're like, well, I guess they're going to go do things, you know, like, whether I like it or not. But, like, my dad tried. My dad, he's not a religious dude because he grew up in a cult. And he was like, that's kind of dodgy. And I was like, well, you don't say, you know. And I remember, like, my dad was terrified of religion. I mean, he's got a son who's a pastor. And I remember the day when my dad said, I told my dad I was going to get water baptized. And he pulled the car over on the side of the road and literally was like, Joe, if you do that, like, there's no going back. Like, you're going to be part of this cult forever. And I was like, no, Dad. No, it was like a scary moment, like, where, like, he was so afraid. But when I started preaching on Sundays, for probably the first 3 or 4 sermons I did, which would have covered the first couple years of kind of interning and learning, my dad came to church and fell asleep in the pew the entire time. But he was there. And, like, that mattered. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't a perfect effort, but it was effort. And it was, or I guess it wasn't the perfect result, but it was effort. And so I just think, like, it is okay. I know that's not a real answer, but again, like, it is a real answer. Like, learn something new, try something new, talk to somebody, coach with somebody, ask another parent friend. As you deal with each individual, there's no way we can cover all the situations, but if we get up and say, today I will try, we are winning. Like, that is a win. And something to take in the bank. You know, when you lay your head down and it's like, man, this was a hard day and my kid's awful and it may be my fault and I don't know. You tried, though, didn't you? And if you did, that matters.
I was just going to say that, again, Jesus modeled compassion. And I think that's something that we need to get a hold of, right? So if you're my age or older, we lived through the AIDS situation where, you know, Christians were not compassionate. I mean, and the media painted us probably pretty realistically, like we're holding placards and we're shouting terrible slogans and we're telling people they're getting what they deserve. That is not the model that Jesus laid out for us. And so I know it's scary if your child has a friend who's exploring this lifestyle. How do we show compassion and not necessarily be like, oh, you should totally go for that, right? I mean, Jesus didn't do that, but he did show compassion, and I think that's always a good place to start.
Yeah, and I suppose I did forget to land the plane on the question, but like again, no, that's not what you were trying to communicate. But my brain was just like, oh yeah, there was a question in there that we were supposed to answer. I do think when it comes to helping your kids share their Christian beliefs, that's where I'm saying, like, just try. Teach them that they're going to come home and from their day and go, did I represent Jesus well? Dialogue that with them. Be right there as they're trying to figure it out. Because again, they're just trying, you're just trying. Like, that's the win, is that what does Peter say? It's like, make every effort when you share your faith to share it with gentleness and respect. Again, there's nothing in that verse that's like, you will do this. It's like, give it a shot though, you know? And so, like, engagement is a win, because if your child feels like it's safe to process that with you, then you can bring your own maturity, strength, dialogue. Hey, let's crack that problem open together, you know?
I know we're technically over time. I've got one more question about specifically LGBTQ, and then if everyone's still game for it, I've got about 3 questions that were from things that people sent in. Would love to get to that if people are still on board. Thumbs up if we're still feeling good about it.
Listen, Paul preached all night, dude. We can do whatever. It's biblical.
You're absolutely right. You can do that.
Someone died that time. That was rough.
Details. How should you respond? And some of this I'm asking even practically, even if you had to not workshop, but kind of talk it out a little bit. Let's say you have a student that you've raised in the church, you've done the best that you possibly can, you've put your best effort in, and they have holistically chosen to fully pursue LGBTQ identity and being part of the community. How do you hold to your own convictions, keep the relationship? What's the line between still acknowledging them as a person and affirming their actions? How do you walk that out?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give probably 3 common scenarios where this comes up. So some people will say, like, let's say my son or daughter is in a relationship with someone of the same sex. Do I invite them over to the holidays? Do I allow them in my house? Do I not? I would say that everybody's got a different threshold that they feel comfortable crossing. There are some Christians who will use someone's preferred pronouns because they feel like it's more compassionate in that moment in an attempt to build a bridge with their child. And the thing is, for anybody who's ever felt stressed about how your kid's gonna turn out, who worries if they're gonna ever cut you out of their life, I have grace for that parent. Grace for someone who says, I'm doing this because I'm desperate to not lose them, that I'm willing to try and like compromise. And there are others who are saying, man, never in a million years would I call a he a she because it's not true, it's not how God made them, etc. Compromise is frequently a dirty word. And I'm not advocating for you to compromise your beliefs, but I am advocating for you to work as hard as you can to find a middle ground. So like you might say, I don't feel comfortable having you and your same-sex partner stay in my home. Well, then maybe consider paying for their hotel. And I know that you're like, but doesn't that acquiesce? I'm like, but you've already said no. Like you've already communicated what your value is. So you have a chance to now show compassion out of a different side, right? Maybe you can't address them by their preferred pronouns because, again, in a traditional Christian viewpoint, we say like, hey, a he is a he and a she is a she, and that's what it is. But is there a nickname you can come up with? A shortening of their name that they'll find acceptable? Something that allows you, again, I think we get focused so much on zero-sum games where we're like, it has to be all this way. And I'm like, it doesn't, though. If somebody's like, I want you to call me a she, and I say, listen, I can't call you that. For example, there was a student who walked this journey, and their name was Mackenzie. They were a girl who felt like they were a guy. And for a season, they went by Mac, and they knew that I was never going to reference them as a he in conversation, and I really wasn't even comfortable using the frequent, like, well, I'm going to call them a they or a them. Like, I struggled with it, but I would call them Mac because they already knew where I stood. And so I could throw them a lifeline of grace. You know what I'm saying? Like it didn't diminish it. I know some people who have said, I will not be at your wedding, but I'll come to your reception. Because they already understand where you're at. You've made the value statement, but then you're saying, I still am with you, and I love you. Now, all that to say, it is very difficult. And some of you are already looking at me like, Joe, I can't cross any of the lines you just said. I can't even come to the compromise. That's understandable. That's why it comes down to like negotiate, have the conversation, do your best to communicate. Hey, and sometimes flipping the script on an individual is part of the process. You say, hey, you are asking me to accept where you're at, and I am struggling with it. I am trying to meet you in any sense without you don't want me to ask you to compromise your values right now, but I don't feel it's fair for you to ask me to compromise mine. But you're dialoguing like and you might lose. That's the thing. You could do all these things and still lose, and your kid cannot talk to you. That sucks. That's the worst. But you can try to come to this point. So that's where, like, again, the win might be, I've said the value statement and they know how I feel, but I throw these little lifelines of grace. That's a tough one, but.
Huge. I love that. As I said, we've got like 3 questions from this, and then we will wrap this up. And at the end, we have a QR code that's a link to a lot of our resources that we've tried to compile, just stuff that we think is helpful both for you, but also things that you may be able to help talk with your students through. We also recorded tonight, and so it'll be accessible through that same link, not immediately if you were to look at it. We still have to, make sure that ends up there because we're not done yet. But one of the questions that I really liked was, how do we navigate dating with students? Is it a hard yes? Is it a hard no? Is there the nuance in between? How should we navigate that?
I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier of have a culture of pointing out character with the people that your kids hang out with, so that when they do get to a place where you feel like whatever fits your family, they're ready to date, they know what they're looking for and they know what's good. So many mistakes are made just by being with the wrong person. Like, how many of us got into a weird situation or made a bad choice just because we were hanging out with people that weren't good. You know, not that people are not made in the image of God.
No, I've hung out with Malachi. Like, I get where this is going.
Very true.
But I think that is a real thing, like calling out those good character points.
I think, again, too, is to talking to your children about, why do you date? What's the point of this, right? What are the results? Like, what happens? What are we doing? We're learning who we are. We're learning what we like, right? And doing those, and they're going to date, even if you think they're not dating, right?
That's just
like,
their special friend, okay? It's
yeah,
not.
like they're at school, and when you're not around, and they have a crush. So talking about, well, why do we date? You know, like, what is the purpose behind it? You know, when you're 14, you're an awful long way from finding a spouse. When you're 18, not so much. We don't know. So talking about the reasons behind dating and what the goal is behind that. Practical guidelines, like, obviously we did not allow members of the opposite sex. Now it might have to be the same sex. I don't know. We didn't have that really issue when my kids were younger. Like, we didn't allow
Another topic for another time.
opposite sexes in their bedroom, ever. Like, no. If there's a member of the opposite sex in our home, they will not be in your bedroom, right? That just was part of the rule. So if they were dating, we tried to instill in our kids the values of, like, it's kind of funny because my son just went and knocked on a door and asked a father if he could take his daughter out for a date, and they are in their 20s. Like, and we tried to instill some of those things that are important, but we talked about with our kids, like, bring them here. We wanted them to bring them home. We wanted to spend time with the person that they were spending time with so that we could influence that relationship, right? So when it does come time to date, how you decide to frame that, right, is important in terms of your relationship. And if you have that good relationship with your kids, then navigating those dating relationships are going to be easier in those conversations. So
I have an admin. Her name is Christine. She works with me. And she is the oldest of 4 kids. Her parents are pastors in our network in Livingston. They've been pastors for over 30 years. All 4 of the kids as adults serve the Lord. And when I asked her, we had these conversations, and she said, her take was, she said, I watched strict, say no constantly, put every rule in place, never, 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 never families have kids that went nuts. And that's not my judgment. Remember, we're mad at Christine, okay, and what she says. Just kidding. But like, her take was like, my parents, she would probably just describe what we call active parenting, where like her parents tried to introduce them to things at certain milestones and like tried to ease them into certain conversations. And, so she was like, from her observation, those who engaged in the dating conversation and like put milestones and timeframes and whatever, versus those who said, well, you're not going to date and it's not going to happen. But like, she found that like that created a longer term like faithfulness to the Lord and a feeling of not like, like when someone says no hard enough, obviously we know what happens. You just run towards it. You're just like, well, if it's that hard of a no, it's going to be that hard of a yes. It's just, so, and again, that's not judgment for all time. I get that there are so many conversations underneath that. But I really appreciated her take as someone who's like lived that experience,
There's a model that obviously I haven't been able to test with my own kids, but I've seen other parents use it with their students that I liked, especially for young boys. Like if you don't have a job to pay for the date and you don't have a car to drive them to the date, then it's not going to be much fun for you. And it put the emphasis not on how bad it was, but it put the emphasis on like setting it up for a fun experience. And the whole methodology was based on going on dates, not exclusively dating. This idea of like, most students that we talk to actually have no idea how to bring somebody and give them exclusive attention for a 2-hour period of time.
How to talk to the opposite sex.
They have no idea. And so underhandedly, I promise I'm not sitting on the stage with any of your students saying, you should go date. I don't say that. Underhandedly, there is this concept of like, I actually hope that students navigate going on dates and learn that experience. It's a skill that you need to learn. And as a parent, you actually get the opportunity to instill some of that. How do you treat somebody well for a 2-hour period of time as a young woman? What should you expect from that guy for a 2-hour period of time? We put this emphasis on exclusivity but there should be a value on. This is a construct that we should learn how to do.
There was a thought that I really wanted to share, and this is a good time to say it. I think it's really, really valuable to put your kids into socially uncomfortable situations on purpose. And I think it, and I don't mean dangerous. I mean like they don't feel comfy. So for example, you might intentionally, when they're like 8 or 9, invite a 6 or 7-year-old child over for them to entertain. Be like, your job is to hang out with them, have a good time, and put their social needs before yours. And I think it's that idea of what I want to do socially isn't as important as what you want to do socially in a safe space. So maybe they go to a nursing home and they play a board game and they hear some weird stories from an 80-year-old. And it gets them comfortable talking to people as people and not just as like a date. It also, I think it does teach them to say like, maybe I want to date this person and I want it to look this certain way and be this way, but I have to put what I think is so fun and so important down and be okay with being not super happy. And I think that helps with boundaries, like creating a kid who is strong and has good boundaries. You have to be okay being awkward and being uncomfortable socially. Being like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's awkward. That's uncomfortable. But if your kid has been like knows how to navigate the nuance of a social engagement from the time that they're 8 or 9 and know how to be a kind, loving person who puts value on other people's time, that's going to carry over into how they treat people when they're dating. And it's hard as parents, like even now, like I have a 2-year-old who's very selfish because he's 2. But my brother's son is special needs. And I put them in a space together. And it's beautiful to watch Ruben meet Niram's needs socially, even though like he's not doing what he wants to do. Like they're crawling around. Ruben wants to run and jump and play, but Niram can't. And teaching your kids that like the tension of these are good things and these are important, but also somebody else's needs also matter, because if we're the whole point of sex is to have a vibrant, beautiful marriage, there's going to be that tension. So that's something that I thought my parents did well. And
Thanks, timed that perfectly. It's fine. One of the next questions that we got, and this is really a delicate one, truthfully, but how do we talk to a child that was born out of wedlock, that the choice was painful and wrong, but that the gift of that child was just that, a gift, that the child isn't, the choice could be a regret, but the child is not a regret.
All right, Nadine, give it up for Nadine.
Well, I think what the question almost answers itself. Is it is okay to say like, I made a decision that I shouldn't have, but that doesn't make you the mistake, right? I made a mistake, but God really turned that mistake into something so unbelievably beautiful, that the story of redemption is better than my mistake was. I don't know how else to... Obviously, that conversation will look different at different ages, right? You might have to have that conversation more than once. You know, it might be one way when they're younger and one way when they're older, where you can be more specific, right? But more than the conversation is how you love them is going to speak volumes beyond that question, I think. If you're treating that child like you love them and you're happy to have them in your life, they're going to know that. And even if the conversation becomes one like, was I a mistake? Well, you weren't planned, but that doesn't make you a mistake. Totally different, right? But if they feel safe and loved, I think that will overcome maybe the doubt.
Yeah, I don't know fully how to answer this question, I'll be honest, and I think it's worth continuing to seek and seek and seek.
Could we expand the question to say, how do you talk to your kids around sexuality when we've made mistakes?
Sure.
Say that, because I think that might
Yeah, broaden it up a little bit. Yeah, I think, again, we've had a lot of notes on humility tonight, and I think as parents, humility is just hard to come by because we're worried it loses its credibility. But I do think it's like really okay in age-appropriate ways to be like, yeah, that was my choice, my mistake that I made. But again, it has like, I also think the way we discipline kids and talk to kids either enforces that they are the problem or that they're not the problem. So like when it comes to disciplining children, we can either say things like, well, you make me so angry, right? But that puts them right in the crosshairs of like, it's you're the problem. Or we can say things like, man, that behavior is just not an acceptable behavior from you. Or like that's, you're putting the attention elsewhere. And also, yeah, just teaching them that like you're responsible for your own life. I think that's why parents saying sorry is very important on different moments because you're teaching them that they are not responsible for your happiness. You're saying, I make choices that have consequences. I'm responsible for me. You're responsible for you. I don't know. This is a tough question, like I said, and I feel pretty out of my depth, which is why I'm like, call in the Calvary, call folks, like read book, like learn the heck out of it because I don't disagree. I think sometimes we come to Q&As and we're like, well, we've got experts, let's get answers. And I'm like, that's the thing, is I just think we have to keep seeking. If the answer's worth it, look everywhere, high and low, under every rock, till you find it. And maybe this tonight is a small piece of that, probably because Nadine's smart and she said something cool. It's not me. But from here, where do you go with that question? It's like, we'll dive into it. It's worth finding the answer.
From personal experience, having a husband who lived a very different life than I did, right? There was often tension about what to share. Right, like, I mean, if Chad was here, he'd be very, very open with you. I mean, he did a lot of stuff before he came to know Jesus. And he was like, I'm going to tell the kids about this. And I was like, I'm not really comfortable with that. Like we had to work through some of that. But in the end, at age-appropriate times, he was pretty honest with them, right? He's like, yeah, I know what that drug feels like. I know what that looks like, right? Because I experienced that. And so being able to talk about those experiences and what it cost him. But again, Denny said it so well, like the redemption story is what ultimately matters. And I think that needs to come through when if you choose to share with your children the mistakes that you made, being able to say like, it doesn't mean there weren't consequences, but man, look at what God did, right? Look at what God did. And I hope that that's something we're reinforcing with our children all the time about any mistakes, about anything that we do wrong. Again, like you said, there's not an easy answer. Every child is different. Every adult is different. Every situation is different. So keep asking the question. Keep looking for the answer. I think that's good advice.
The last question that we have, and I tried to save at least one lighthearted question for the end. That way it didn't feel super heavy as we walked out.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. What is the appropriate amount of, and how do we demonstrate healthy sexuality in front of and to our kids?
It's 8:26. I think that's plenty of...
Yeah, how do we do that? And this is one of those questions that's really important, that there's a difference between just talking about sex and sexuality. How do you demonstrate healthy sexuality in your own relationship to and in front of your kids?
Well, obviously, I think you should be affectionate with your spouse appropriately. So I think they need to see you touch. They need to see you kiss. They need to see you giggle. They need to see you laugh together. As our children got older, honestly, we made it a little awkward sometimes. Like, I think it's okay to make it awkward sometimes because I want my children to know that sex and sexuality as part of marriage is a great thing. I want them to look forward to it. And so, obviously, there's limits to what you're gonna do, but it's okay. I mean, I thought it was funny when my kids would say, "Get a room," right? And my husband would say, "We've got one," right? And so obviously we're not saying that when they're 4 or 5. We're talking like junior high, high school age, but they need to see that there's a healthy affection for one another, and how you present that is gonna determine their view of it. If they never see you touch, they never see you kiss, they never see you make googly eyes at each other, whatever you want to do, or hint about certain things, I think they start to think that, oh, like sex is just like a chore and something I have to endure when I get married maybe, and it doesn't look like it's any fun. Why would I want to get married, right? So I say make it awkward sometimes for your kids.
What are you doing to make it awkward for Ruben right now? Like, that's my question.
Ooh, what a great question. Let's offline about that, Joe.
Circle back to it.
Circle back.
I don't know. Like, Nate, that's the right answer. Like, I think everyone's gonna say the same thing. It's like you're showing affection. Like, my wife and I will frequently, like, if we are, kissing or hugging or saying hello or whatever, you want to say there. It's like, to add a little tagline takes very little time, but it creates culture in your home. So, like, we will say, like we might kiss and then, or hug, and my youngest daughter, and I think a lot of you have this experience if you have multiple kids, but there's one kid who's like, I love affection, and you can't tuck me into bed enough. And then there's another kid that's like, if you ever kiss me, I will cut you. And, like, that's how my two kids are, and it's really wild. But, like, my one daughter, when she sees us kissing, will be like, ew. And I'll be like, no, I love kissing your mom. Isn't it cool that when you're married, you actually get to kiss another person and it's so much fun? Like, you're adding a tagline of culture and value that takes 2 seconds to say. My youngest daughter will run and she'll be like, family hug. And she just wants to be like right there, And again, like, and I mean, people have said it for ages and books have said it, but it's like, it's okay. I love the concept, probably because I'm not inherently a kid person. I know that I run like youth and kids camps, but don't tell anybody. But my point is that like my wife and I are unashamed about the fact that our children are not the center of our world. And I know that that's been oft repeated, and I'm sure there are people who have years of parenting experience who will nod their head and be like, yeah, that's smart. But like, and again, we love our kids. We're going to spend the next however many years making great experiences and memories and whatever. But I have said the phrase to my kids before. I'm like, kids, I love you, but I got into this thing because I love your mom the most. Like, she's the best. And then, of course, you back it up with like, well, I love you the same too, but it's like different and whatever, and then you don't pick favorites even though you have a favorite. I'm just kidding. But like, it's okay to be like, hey, mom and dad are not always going to cut off their affection, their conversation, their moment, their whatever, to like take care of the kid. It's like, I mean, obviously if there's like an injury, probably should. But you get what I'm saying. We've all been interrupted, and it's like, man, it's okay for me to be like, hey, I'm gonna go talk to your mom, or I'm gonna say hi to her. Hey, I'm gonna give your mom a kiss because I haven't seen her all day. That just communicates to them like it is healthy for a couple to prioritize each other.
I do want to add that it's possible that there's a single parent that's in here or listening to this, and I realize that makes it different. So if you are single and not dating, I think it's even more important that you just have the conversations about it, right? You still had a child at some point, so there was still some sexuality happening in your life, right? And so if you're dating as a single parent, that becomes a pretty good baseline for like, how do I want to show my children how to do this, right? What should that look like? What is acceptable for mom or dad if I'm dating? What am I portraying to them? How do I? So it's gonna look different. Obviously, if you're a single parent, they don't get to see you kissing each other, but you can comment on that, like maybe in a movie, like, oh, see that couple, like that's married and how they are enjoying each other. Like, that's what God designed for us? Like, you can use examples in your life. That's a really
Get creative. Use
easy.
Puppets, okay? Like
use puppets, like. Right?
It's weird. This has been 2 hours, dog. Like,
I know, but it is weird how kids will,
cooked.
like, it doesn't take a lot. Like, I don't know, it's just like innate, like a kid's playing with a doll and they start calling them the mommy and a daddy and like, right? Use that to your advantage, right? It just happens. They pick up on stuff from other people, even if you're a single parent. So I don't want you to feel like you can't teach them this. You can. So you just have to get a little bit more creative maybe about how it happens.
Youth pastors have an uncanny way of derailing everything we just did with a one comment. All the important thing you need to remember for tonight is use puppets. It'll probably work out.
Probably fine.
It'll probably be fine. Well, I hope this has been helpful and maybe insightful. I don't know the right word for it.
I hope that Nadine, Malachi, and Denny have been very insightful.
But the big thing, just as with your kids and with your students, as a church, this is a conversation. We're not just dropping this month-long series and this one night and be like, best of luck. Hopefully you guys have all the tools that you're ever gonna need. Same thing with your kids. This shouldn't just be, I know we called this the talk, but this isn't just a one-time conversation. This is like setting up the pattern of transparency through their life. And as a church, that's what we're committed to as well. Like, this is an ongoing conversation. This QR code with the links has resources. My hope and my dream is to keep this updated. And as we find good resources, giving you access to them. Because like Joe talked about, being educated, trying to expand our knowledge base on this is crucial. And there's some really good books, podcasts. I'm going to take some of Joe's thunder because there's a book on there that I read for college. It's called People to Be Loved by Preston Sprinkle. And if you've ever had any sort of curiosity of how to talk about, do ministry with people that are in the LGBTQ community, I couldn't recommend it enough. And there's a lot of other really good resources on there as well. I'm going to pray for us, and then we're done. 30 minutes late. Honestly, not too bad. God, thank you. God, thank you for creating sex. And all the married people said amen. I ask that you would help us do the best job we possibly can, reflecting your purpose and your intentionality in this gift that you've given us to our children. That in the moments that it's awkward, in the moments that we don't have the right things to say, that you would remind us it's okay that it's awkward and we don't have the right things to say. But that you would help us to use the tools that we have available to us to try and build that relationship, build that bridge with our student, with our kids. Try to set them up to hopefully make the best choices that they can, not out of an obligation to make the right choice or fear of making their own choice, but out of a desire to love you and be more like you every day. God, let that be our heart when it comes to sexuality. We love you and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Could you have a huge round of applause for these three wonderful people? And you guys have a great night. If you see Katrin Perry on a Sunday or any other time, make sure to tell her how much you love the spaghetti. It was delicious. Have a good night.
When in doubt, break out the puppets. I'm sorry, I'm done. I promise I will be...